Namaste, and welcome to this discussion on sequencing for Pitta dosha. So if you recall, Pitta dosha is the dosha of fire and water. It is the essence of heat and transformation in our body and in our world. When we think about the virya of Pitta dosha, of course, we can then understand that it is the one dosha that is actually hot in its thermal energy, its virya. When we look at Pitta dosha's tendency as well, we think of flame in the body. So issues that are associated with flame, things like acid indigestion or ulcers or tension, pressure, hot headaches, right? All of this is the tendency towards inflammation. And inflammation is generally what happens in the body when there's heat and water together. And so by that I mean, when we look at inflammation, we first look at the essence of irritation. And so say you have touched a chili pepper and you rub your eye. Oh no. You've rubbed your eye and your body then has to react to flush out these toxins that are otherwise burning your cells, that are causing this irritation. So it sends more water, and it does that by sending blood flow. And your blood is red, it's hot, it carries heat around your body. And so your blood is very closely associated to Pitta dosha. When we think about that tendency of irritation, when it then becomes stuck there. So I've rubbed my eye with chili, but guess what? There was also bacteria there. So now I have extra blood flow to this area, I have extra liquid, and I have extra heat. This is the ideal breeding ground for infection. And so all of this same energy, this energy of possible infection, is what's going to cause inflammation. It's going to cause it to become stuck, and there's going to be a stuckness of the blood flow into this area. There's a drain, if you can imagine it, right? I now have created this one energy, this space in my body where blood must flow to then now I have to deal with first the irritation, then there's inflammation, then now, oh goodness, now do I have to deal also with an infection. And so all of this is Pitta energy. It's your body's response to these things. These things themselves are not the Pitta energy. The Pitta energy is what your body does in response. And so the same thing happens when we look to an emotional level. When we look at the person whose mentality is very much wrapped up in perfectionism. And so then when they're at work, they may get into that situation where they're critiquing their boss, or they're critiquing other people who are not perfect, and everything is not perfect. And then they may turn that criticism in on themselves because they're also not perfect, because they don't have everything already figured out, for example, and everything wasn't perfect in their work. And so this same energy, if you think about it, is creating a similar drain. It's creating a similar irritant just from that perspective. Holding on to that perspective, work all of a sudden becomes the chili pepper in your eye. And so now work becomes this thing that you are constantly thinking about, that you are irritated by, that you are focused on, that you are draining energy towards. And it can create this same set of inflammation. So then you have a headache every time you think about going to work, or you think about talking to your boss. You maybe don't externalize the emotions, you repress the emotions, and so it gets all caught in your shoulders and in your neck. And this leads to more headaches, to migraines, to tension, to pain, to pressure. All of this is what happens with Pitta dosha. And as well, one last thing about the inflammation and why I talk so much about pressure. If you think about a hose, so a tube that's holding water, if I all of a sudden have created a blockage, right? Some blockage that says, hey, this is where you need to send the energy. This is the chili pepper in your eye. All of a sudden, that energy is going to be flowing and get stuck here. And there's going to be a greater buildup of pressure over time as this hose of water, or really your blood, keeps flowing in that direction, and I have this thing blocking it. So now I have all of this pressure built up. This is the energy of Pitta dosha that your body responds to these irritants with. We then also want to look at the pranic flow of energy. So our body being an energy system, how does prana then flow when there's excess Pitta dosha or imbalanced Pitta dosha present? Well, the first thing that I just had mentioned was that sort of pressure buildup. And so this doesn't necessarily happen just in our core. This can happen anywhere in the body where there's pressure buildup because of that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But in general, a lot of our pressure and tension tends to get stored in our shoulders, in our neck, and as well, being a polar energy, when that is here at the top, we also look at the base of our spine. So our hips is generally another area where we store a lot of that. If we look at those perfectionist tendencies that are creating so much tenderness in the neck and the shoulders, there's really likely underneath fear or resentment. And so there's always some emotional something deeper underneath. And those things underneath, while we may experience symptoms here, we may not realize the underneath is actually the level of tension and tightness down in the hips and in the glutes. So as well, when we look at the pranic energy flow of Pitta dosha, really it has to do with the fire element, primarily in the core, and secondarily, the water element in the hips. So in this area, we have sort of a lot of heat being generated. And as well, heat rises. So this is why Pitta can then also end up with migraines, with tension headaches, with a lot of sort of dry, scratchy, irritated eyes, for example, because that heat is rising. So as well, there's one thing to keep in mind that I already discussed in the pranayama for the Pitta dosha video, which is that for Pitta dosha, it's very common that the exhale is shorter than the inhale. And so this is kind of like stoking the flame. And in general for Pitta, we want to be able to practice in a way when we are practicing that allows for a longer, slower exhale, that allows us to expand the volume of the exhale. And that cannot happen when there is too much effort. So we really go back to that sense within the Yoga Sutras of Sthira Sukha Asana, of this balance between effort and ease within the asana that we practice. This is very important for Pitta dosha. Pitta dosha in general loves a challenge, loves a lot of effort to be exerted, and is why their perfectionist tendency, for example, turns into that type A personality. But in general, in the yoga practice, in the asana practice, this is actually a safe space on the mat to practice stepping away from those tendencies. So in general, I would practice having some challenge, but not too much for Pitta dosha. And so it's cool, it's fine to have a peak pose, but it's not necessarily the end-all be-all. It's not necessarily the main goal. And even then, you may think of peak poses that allow us to change the energetic. So a peak pose that is actually going to be very opening, very expansive. Not necessarily one where you have to put a lot of force. So if you think about a handstand, for example, not only is there a lot of force that goes into it, there's a lot of effort that goes into my core and my shoulders. So already the heat energy, right? And then as well, there's extra blood flow into my head because my head is now perpendicular to the ground, facing downwards. So handstand, for example, as a peak pose would not be recommended for Pitta dosha. But you could have a pose like king pigeon or queen pigeon, which is going to be able to be very open, be very expansive, be able to release heat by opening the chest, creating more surface area to radiate heat out, while also pulling energy down into the hips, for example. So we also want to think about where Pitta dosha is practicing, really before we get into the nitty-gritty of what else there's to consider in this practice. When we're considering where Pitta dosha is practicing, this is not the place to be practicing in a hot yoga studio, in a hot yoga room, where it's going to be hot, humid, and sweaty. In fact, we want to, if possible, have a very yin type space. So when we consider a space that is very hot, is very humid, is very bright, all of this has to do with the electric energy of yang. We want to be able to move into yin energy. And so this energy is more associated with cool, with dark, with not so stimulating. And so actually not having fluorescent lights, maybe having even a candlelit practice, closing some of the windows, having a darker, cooler space similar to a cave, having a very well-ventilated room. This is all going to be very balancing to working with Pitta dosha. When it also then comes to working with this energetic tendency of the pranic flow, so a lot of this heat accumulating in the core. So in the organs of the core in particular that Pitta is associated with is the intestines, the small intestine, and the liver. And so these organs in particular are where we really need to leave a lot of our focus for this practice. We also want to be able to consider how to stretch and detoxify these organs. So, because when we think of inflammation, when we think of irritation, one way that this is generated within the body itself is through toxic buildup. So if you think of that hose that is trying to run water, and something else has blocked it, something is irritating it, there's going to be a buildup not only of blood, but of everything the blood is carrying. And in every single cell in your body, there's constantly chemical reactions that have to let go of toxins. Those toxins then build up, and this becomes part of the issue for Pitta dosha that creates this spiral into greater inflammation. So we really want to be able to detoxify the liver, for example, and detoxify the area of the intestines. Your intestines are the seat of your fire and are responsible for a lot of discerning what to take in and what then later in your colon to let go of. We then look at the liver, and it is actually, there's a very specific relationship between our intestines and the liver. So the liver is the intestines are the first place that your blood starts to actually draw and absorb whatever you've ingested, whatever you've eaten. This is really when digestion starts to turn into absorption. Once it is absorbed, it goes directly through something called the hepatic portal vein, directly to your liver to then be filtered. And so as well, your liver is not only filtering all of your blood, but it's also filtering this very first drop of nourishment and nutrients that you are ingesting from your food. So in order to release the toxic load, you want to be able to work with the liver in particular. And in general, we want to draw tension out of the body, because tension is going to be creating excess pressure and excess tension, particularly in the areas of the neck and the shoulders and in the hips. This is going to, as well, when we're working and looking at heat rising, we actually want to be able to draw heat down. And so similar to working with Vata dosha, we want to be able to draw heat down and into the feet, and also down, particularly more importantly, into the hips, because this is an area of a lot of tension. So some poses to then work with when working with Pitta dosha. We want to look at being able to work with any poses where the side is open, where there is lateral flexion. And so this could be as simple as having hands up above and stretching to one side. You can also think about poses with the lateral flexion or the side being open, like Trikonasana, triangle pose, or like half moon, Ardha Chandrasana, for example. All of this is going to create a large surface area of stretching open the edges and the core of the body in order to radiate out that excess heat that is stored in the core. And by radiating out from here, it is not necessarily rising past and moving upwards. Another thing to consider is working with twists. So twists are very therapeutic for Pitta dosha because it allows us to get into and detox the liver and the intestines and really keep blood flow moving in this area instead of having it get stuck in that hose. We are in this way actually allowing that something stuck to be moved because we are twisting it out. We are twisting more blood flow there, and we are allowing the prana to flow there by directing our attention through this asana into those areas in the core. We also then think about chest openers. So chest openers in general are going to be great for releasing excess heat. It's considered that certain heart openers can be heating, but really this is allowing the heat to lift up for Pitta and be released, just similar to as it's released in the side bends into anything that is open on the side. It's allowing us to then open the heart, open the chest, and radiate that heat outwards. So as well, when we look at working with these chest openers, any chest opener where the belly is on the ground, and especially if the belly is on a rolled up towel, mat, or blanket, in between the space of the ribs and above the pubic bone, in that really juicy center of your organ ring, this is going to help press onto the marma or acupressure points that are going to work with Pitta dosha because there's so much energy focused on the solar plexus, on the navel, on this core area of the body. So thinking about any type of cobra over a roll, for example, or thinking about Dhanurasana, bow pose, right? Fully opening up and as well tucking your tailbone down in that pose. So we are not only tucking the tailbone down, we're drawing our focus and awareness into the hips and into the core, but as well there's that chance to then lift up and release some of the heat out through the heart. We then want to think about certain poses we actually want to have a little bit of caution with when working with Pitta dosha. When we look at forward bends, it's considered that forward bends, because there is that closing off, there is sort of this almost like putting a blanket onto your core, right? You are closing off your core, and in that closing, you are actually generating more heat. That heat is staying trapped in. And so this can be very good for Vata dosha, for Kapha dosha, but in general for Pitta dosha, it's recommended that working with forward bends, you do not hold them for a very long time. And if you are in a forward bend, you would want it to be somewhere where your hips are open. And so your energy can be pulled downwards. So think about a wide-legged child's pose. Allows there to be more focus in drawing the energy down towards your hips. As well, something like pigeon. When you're in pigeon pose and then you forward fold, this is allowing you to still draw the energy that heat, you are drawing it down and into areas where you're actually using the heat to release tension. And so this is something to keep in mind. As well, inversions. When we look at inversions, inversions are not per se always bad for Pitta dosha. What we do want to avoid in general with Pitta dosha is having the crown of the head pointing down towards the floor. And so even in headstand or handstand, for example, these are poses where the head is pointing down towards the floor. And what does that cause? The head is below the heart in these poses, and so really it is creating the opportunity for extra blood to be flowing to the head. This is going to cause excess heat. So because Pitta is already dealing with the heat rising to the head, we actually want to prevent that. And so we don't necessarily want to be working with a lot of inversions where the crown of the head is beneath the heart. Something we can consider, though, is, for example, viparita karani. So having your legs up the wall, even, right? In this pose, you are having your head really underneath the heart, but in a way, or at least in line with the heart. And so you're still getting that chance to relax, to cool down, but you're not exerting so much effort. Another inversion to consider working with would be sarvangasana. And so this is shoulder stand. A particular note about working with shoulder stand is that when we move into shoulder stand, we have to activate one of the bandhas in particular. And this is Jalandhara bandha, having chin towards the chest. If we think about this movement, what we are creating is a lock of energy in the throat lock in Jalandhara bandha, so that heat does not rise. And so, as well, in many of your poses, you can consider working with Jalandhara bandha to allow people to relax their chin down towards their chest, to allow some of that heat, instead of rising, to stay in the chest, to then later also be released out through a heart opener, for example. We also can consider working with poses that are going to open the hips. And so poses like Gomukhasana, this is going to have one knee stacked on top of the other. And then as well, you can bring your arms to clasp. So not only am I opening the chest, I'm creating space for this heat in my core to radiate out, and I'm drawing my energy and awareness down into my hips. So this is another really good option of how can we open but also draw energy down. When we look at working with this as well, how do we open the hips? How can we get creative with how do we then open the hips but also move energy down? How can we still use that to incorporate chest openers and also incorporate twists? Think about all that you can do in a lunge position, for example. So in a lunge position, you can press down through your foot, both feet really, to ground the energy down. You could clasp hands behind the head and open the heart. You could place hands onto low back and open the heart in lunge. And you can tuck the tailbone forward and send the hips forward. In this way, you're drawing energy down into your thighs, into your quads, into your hips. And so all of this is pulling energy and tension down out of the body. You can think about twisting lunges. So you're in a lunge position. This also allows you to twist. And once you're twisting in a lunge position, you can also send your hips back a little further, a few inches. And this helps create an opening in those postures. When we look at poses where the hips are open in general, so poses like Trikonasana, triangle pose, or even a hip opener like reversed or revolve triangle. So this would actually allow us to get into the hips while also adding in a twisting motion. So we are up-leveling the level of benefit we are offering to Pitta dosha by thinking, how can we add these different bits of medicine into a single pose? And as well, another bit of medicine to add into poses for Pitta dosha in particular is to relax the neck. And so for relaxing the neck, this is the cue of inhale, telescoping the ribs. By that, it is telescoping the ribs up away from the hips. And exhale, relax left ear towards left shoulder. And to come out of these poses, to retrain Pitta to move in a way that is more gentle, you would have people place a hand on the side of the head and inhale, lift the head up. So when we look at this, for example, you can have a pose like a one-leg seated side bend. So left leg is extended out, right knee is bent, right foot is pressing into left thigh. From this pose, left hand is on the inside, or even to create more space, on the outside of left leg. Inhale, left arm up. Exhale, side bend to the left. Relax left ear towards left shoulder. So you can see in this pose, I am creating a lateral flexion. I'm opening up the pose. I'm opening down in my hips and in the channels of my legs. And then a second variation for this could be neck release. So inhale, fingertips straight up. And exhale, fingertips point down towards my hips. And in this way, I am opening throughout the neck. As well, you can cue to lean back slightly, and you will feel the level of opening that you are creating as you reach through fingertips and allow Pitta dosha to inhale and release some of the tension that is built up in the shoulders. As well, you can have a hand in any position where the neck is released to press and traction the shoulder to the side and slightly back. In these poses, taking deep breaths, allow you to move out any stuck and stagnant energy that may be trapped in the neck. And so you can think of how you can add a neck release into almost any posture, especially poses like triangle, like twists, like a twisting lunge. There's so many chances where you can actually just relax the neck, where in fact the strength of your legs can hold you up in these poses, and your neck doesn't have to be so tight, so tense. As teachers, we want to be very observant of when people are over-tensing their neck, especially Pitta dosha. And in this way, we can help them to relax the neck, either to the sides or down towards the chest, to create Jalandhara Bandha. In general, working with Pitta dosha, we want to help people to let go of tension, to let go of perfection, to let go of so much of this striving that our society in general is pushing onto all of us. For Pitta dosha, allowing a safe space in a yoga practice to let go of having to achieve, having to do, and in fact just moving into feeling is one of the most healing and therapeutic things we can offer for Pitta dosha. And so in general, when working with your intentions with Pitta dosha, I would always be working to get people to have a deeper breath and take a long exhale. To really work on letting things go. As well, when you move into the Shavasana period, you can even guide a let go practice similar to the practice that I've guided here in this course. You can go straight into having a let go practice at the very end of your asana practice to really allow the body to release any heat that may have built up and move throughout your day with a greater sense of balance, peace, tranquility, and centeredness. So, if you have any questions about working with Pitta dosha, please let me know in the comments and I will be very happy to get back with you. And I hope you enjoy working with sequencing for Pitta dosha. And namaste.